So coming up next, introducing them now for the second time, right? Just like Stefan, I'll be introducing Mike Parkin and Igor Guvero from Vulcan Cyber. Igor and Mike, take it away. I see Igor. Actually, I don't see Mike. Is Mike here?
Yeah, I believe Mike is on the panel still. There he is.
There we go. There we go. Okay.
I am here. I just have my video off.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. So Mike is indeed here. So Mike and Igor, take it away. I'm excited to see this here. Tell us about what Vulcan Cyber does and how you can help us in our next Internet Fire Drill.
Okay, good morning, and thank you everyone for morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. So I'm going to be going over how cyber risk has really become a major issue that's top of the executive food chain. We know that. What Log4Shell meant to them, and then I'm going to focus a bit on the challenges of risk management. After that, I'm going to hand it off to Igor, and Igor is going to go through a demonstration of the Vulcan Cyber risk management platform. At the end, hopefully we'll have enough for this. I've reserved some time at the end so we can take your questions as we go. So let me kind of getting my rig perfectly set up here. So I've got multiple screens going. So give me a second. And there we go. So according to KPMG's 2021 CEO Pulse survey, after a year of COVID-19 shaking up the top of mind issues for leaders they surveyed, cyber risk has returned to the top position where it's been in the past. It displaced talent risk and supply chain issues that were number 1 and number 2 in the previous survey, and has moved up from 5th place back to being top of mind. This is genuinely a boardroom level problem, as I'm sure we all know. And honestly, cybersecurity really should be high on the executive leadership's priority list. Ransomware, IP theft, supply chain disruptions, customer and competitive data theft. Any of these are things that can hurt the bottom line directly or indirectly by damaging the organization's reputation. And fortunately, leadership has really learned to recognize that. And they've given cyber risk mitigation a lot more attention, and they've given it the budget, and they've given it the time that it deserves. So while Log4j was a huge issue in late 2021, ultimately Log4j itself is just a vector. It was the vulnerability that threat actors used to reach their ends. The reality is that for a lot of organizations, the how of the attack isn't really necessarily as important as what the intruders are doing when they get inside, whether they're disrupting things, whether they're stealing things, whether they're messing about, or they're trying to go financial ends with ransomware or something similar. But then we all know that, right? This is our world. It's what we do. And from the perspective of the big chair, from the CEO's position, Log4j and other instances that have come before it, they elicit a series of questions that get asked of the CISO and the cybersecurity managers below the CISO and other members of the team as it goes down. So questions are going to be, what's our exposure? What are you doing to deal with the risk? And the big one that comes out towards the end, or not as far into the end as we would hope sometimes, is have you fixed it yet? And being in the business of fixing these things, that's something that actually cares about. So right now, those questions are really all focused about Log4j, because that's still what's top of mind right now. That's the current big one that's hitting us right now. But they're going to be asked the next time a major vulnerability surfaces, those same questions. It's going to be, whatever the name of that, the next one is, that's the one that they're going to be asking about to see whether it's been fixed. And the fact is, these questions get asked over and over again whenever vulnerability makes the news, no matter whether it's something major like Log4j or one of the myriad minor ones that are constantly cropping up, right? We see the new CVEs get released all the time. We see the new reports that come out. We see the vulnerability announcements. We're always asking, are we at risk of this? So whether it's a 0-day on a new application or an old vulnerability that's been overlooked for a long time, Log4j was an example of that. It had been around for a while before it was exploited, or a new take on an old attack. We know it's going to happen again. You know, we're probably going to see variants of the Log4j attack as people work around, you know, mitigations we've put in place. So that leads us into how we're going to handle risk management. So the steps for a vulnerability management program are going to look something like what we've got on this slide. You know, very typical. Details may change, but this is typically what we're going to see. You're going to have scanning for vulnerabilities as they come up. So when a new vulnerability is released, the signatures come out, and they get scanned for. And then we consolidate that information, understand where in our environments the vulnerable systems actually live. We then move into doing triage, you know, to see which one of those are most at risk, which one needs to be fixed first. And then the sometimes challenging, depending on the organization, part of sorting out which team is going to handle which part of the solution. You know, your IT team, your InfoSec team, your firewall guys, your networking guys, depending on what it is. You then move into deploying the actual mitigations, whether it's compensating controls or putting in patches, compensating controls being, you know, firewall rules, WAF adaptations, whatever you need to do to keep the wolves at bay, so to speak. And then tracking the work to make sure that everything that needs to get done actually gets done. That's where our trouble ticketing systems come in, you know, your remedies, your Jira, your ServiceNow, whichever tools you're using for it. And then finally doing the report on how it all went, whether it's executive reporting, whether you're reporting to the board, whether you're simply reporting up through your own team, how this happened. There's a reporting component that goes into this. Now, the challenge is for a lot of organizations is there's often not a single tool that ties all of these different functions and stages together. You've got tools that handle system inventory and patch management. There are vulnerability scanners that see if there's any issues with that have come out, and you know, whatever the latest troubles is, we can scan for them. There's trouble ticketing systems. They're going to be tracking the work once it gets assigned, so people know who's doing what and when, and are actually tracking it as they go. But a lot of time, they don't have a tool that's tying it all together. And perhaps worse, triage and collaboration are often handled by written or non-written processes and the tribal knowledge of how an organization has done this in the past. Depends on the organization, obviously. You know, bigger organizations are going to have, you know, much more firm process in place, but there's a whole range. You know, we're dealing with everything from tiny startups to, you know, Fortune 5s that have different levels of risk, different levels of problems. And what becomes a problem is when you get issues that the teams are siloed. So this is a common thing, right? This are often different silos. So people with the tribal knowledge of who can do what, they move on to other roles. The knowledge ends up going with them. And the next time something comes up, the coordination between the different teams can be challenging at best because the person who knew who did what is now no longer there. The cross-silo communication problem is actually bigger than people realize. Now, I'm pretty sure we've all worked in an organization or worked with an organization that has a tool or three doing inventory and patch management. And that tool is run by an IT department. They have a process built around it and the normal patch cycle, but that cycle may not really be designed to react to a sudden hotfix situation. On the other hand, InfoSec is running the vulnerability scanner, but then they have to rely on email or something else to tell the IT team about the issue so that they can respond and fix this newly discovered hole. Security operations can add some modifications on the firewall, or the WAF or another part of the stack they have control of, but they don't really have a way to assure that the fixes on the endpoint happen. Now, process can help a lot. As I mentioned, you can have really good fixed solid processes. But when the process involves manual triage, meetings to discuss how you're going to go about the fix, someone assigning a case in the ticketing system, then making sure it all gets done, it's easy to understand how things can break without the tools to do it. And we know that none of this is actually easy to execute. I mean, there's a reason we have a change management process and the patch cycles that are tied to change management. I've actually done change management at one point in my career, and it's, there's a whole series of things you have to do to make sure that things are done correctly so you don't break other stuff. We have to weigh that risk between leaving a vulnerability in place and putting in the hotfix and having the hotfix possibly break something else in the environment. That's why we have dev, test, and production environments, right? So we can make sure that the cure isn't worse than the problem by dropping it into the test environment and making sure it didn't kill anything. And once it's vetted, we can now deploy it. But that adds time and can add some complexity. So this all plays into the triage and risk management aspects. And ideally, your risk management tool can help overcome some of the shortcomings we're seeing. And I'm talking about a tool that's specifically focused on risk management overall, not on any specific piece of it. Now, a lot of tools can perform multiple functions within their focus space. The vulnerability scanner can reference the relevant CVE, for example. Or the system management tool can see that new patches have been made available, they've been released by the vendor, and they can get them queued up to deploy them. But those systems may not always be talking to each other. When you have multiple tools, it can get even more complicated. You've got a couple of vulnerability scanners, and not only do they not catch necessarily the same things, they don't agree on which one is more important when they do both see a problem. That's the same problem. And we see a very similar thing when an organization has its own products or homegrown internal projects that are relying on third-party components, which is what we saw with L4J or Log4J, with a lot of different organizations having this embedded in what they're doing. And now it's vulnerable, so they have to go back and fix it and make sure it doesn't break their own stuff. So the tools that track development project and perform source code scanning, they may be different than what you're seeing in IT operations, but the process is going to be similar. And so are the challenges. Recognize the problems, such as the third-party library or application, which is mentioned with Log4j, then getting the right people to implement it, test it, and deploy a fix, and then tracking it to completion. That's where we run into some serious challenges. The details are different, but you're looking at more or less the same set of issues. There we go. So this quote is from a Ponemon report and kind of sums up the problem that we're getting at here. Organizations spend a lot of time managing the vulnerability response process rather than executing to that vulnerability response process. And I've touched on some of the reasons this is the case, right? Siloed responsibilities, the challenge of cross-organization communications, tools that aren't always working together, processes that aren't always optimal, don't necessarily flexible enough for a rapid response, and finally the challenge of identifying just what a new vulnerability means to the organization and how the fix might impact other systems. That looping back to the change management challenge. And these are all factors that really should be addressed by a risk management system. Unfortunately, not all of the ones do, whether it's a product or whether it's something that's been cobbled together as processes for dealing with risk management. Now, a major goal for us in developing Vulcan Cyber was bridging the gap between the various components in the security stack in order to get the right people, the right information, so they can get the most out of the resources they have. By taking the source data through multiple channels, we consolidate everything and coordinate it so people can get the fixes in place that will do the most good. Because sometimes the current big news fix isn't necessarily the one that provides the greatest risk reduction. We point you to the ones that are actually going to really do you the most good. Now, I'm going to take some questions after this is all over, but at the moment, I am going to show you how we do what we do, and I am going to hand this off to my colleague, Igor, who is going to walk us through a demonstration. Igor, the ball is in your court.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. Perfect. You should be able to see my screen at this point in time. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for discussion, Mike. From my perspective, I will be essentially demonstrating next 10 to 15 minutes a little bit of what Mike has alluded to, how Vulcan really targets things like Log4j vulnerabilities, what we are about, and how we can actually assist and lend a hand in that particular matter. Just from I guess the aspect of what we're going to cover in a quite short demo, we'll discuss essentially the identification of assets affected by Log4j vulnerabilities, as well as potential remediation that could be applied very quickly to remove these types of problems from your system. As you can see on this particular screen, we're not by any means going to go into any deep details on this. I just want to present and let you know that the connections really from Vulcan perspective are numerous. We essentially get the data and we ingest the data from numerous sources. Once the data is ingested, we will consolidate it, we'll correlate it, we'll actually prioritize it. And then at that moment in time, we'll orchestrate that particular information to our ticketing systems, for example, and then in the aftermath, to remediation systems and reporting and analytics. We'll see in a second what that really means. But as you can see in here, the information collected comes from different various sources: infrastructure scan, application security scans, container scans, CSPM tools as well. Quite a lot of integrations. When it comes to the remediation portion, we target remediation for infrastructure as well. So things like SCM, Ivanti, Chef Puppet are kind of products that we directly integrate with to stage potential patchings and remediations. So let's quickly jump into the dashboard in here, and let's take a quick peek into really what we're going to do with Log4j and in general, how that kind of stands out. Before we do, you'll notice right off the bat that one of the key performance indicators or KPIs presented on this particular dashboard, which is essentially a current capture of all the data that you've amassed, that you've consolidated, is our security posture rating. And really, it's a direct reflection into what you consider your risk appetite. So Vulcan will essentially allow you to set a particular threshold to define what's acceptable, what is not acceptable. And based on that threshold, it will calculate and compute an SPR rating to really indicate more or less what is your risk posture, how secure are you currently. And you'll see additional things like pretty much the total amount of critical vulnerabilities, are they increasing, are they decreasing, any actions that might have happened from automation perspective, et cetera. But one thing that we're going to concentrate on here right now is essentially Log4j explicitly. So Log4j, there's a special widget that kind of was born out of the event that has happened, and it is going to essentially facilitate a way to look into these kind of problems. So if I select here track, if I just go into this particular setting, this is essentially right now providing us with a list of assets that are experiencing the Log4j vulnerability, and also provide us with different means on how to react right now to what we've encountered in here. From the perspective of just vulnerabilities, and in this case, obviously Log4j ones, you will see a lot of interesting things. You will see the overall max risk for vulnerability, as well as minimal risk, and if that differs based on assets, the sources where we're collecting these particular assets and where these vulnerabilities are coming from. And of course, when did we see it first time? When did we see it last time? Is it still present in the system? An interesting point too, which can really assist for something that's a little bit more than just demo data, is if you're in production looking at this information, you can really kind of hone in and look into where are you experiencing the biggest hit or attack or threat vector of potential attack on how many assets. And you can kind of know that patching one particular Log4j vulnerability in this case is going to essentially affect 4 different assets that are in your ownership. And of course, anything SLA related is going to be present as well. So you will know whether you are breaching SLA. Chances are with Log4j, you will be, because the SLA typically is set to critical. Critical is usually set to about a week, maybe slightly longer. It means that a lot of these things are obviously being actively very fixed, but your SLA is going to suffer due to some of these zero-day attacks. Business groups in here, just a quick explanation really where that comes from. Vulcan provides you with means to manage your assets from different standings based on business groups and tags. In this particular case, business group can be defined based on just a category of definition of an asset. So one can use this to really quickly drill down into different either business units or types of information that are going to be pertinent for some groups, right? Certain business groups might be more impacted by Log4j than other ones. And you can kind of use the dashboarding to figure out really what that means to you. Now, since we're looking at these vulnerabilities, and we actually see we have a handful of them here, about 6. What do we do next, right? So the data is ingested, the data has come across. We have a lot of different ways of figuring out what to really tackle first. Obviously, we have some basic insights into risk scoring, but let's take a quick example or quick look into an example of what one really looks like and what we're trying to achieve with some of these descriptors that you see. For starters, you will notice in this particular case that we have a lot of definitions and a lot of different labels based around this particular threat. So when we're looking at vulnerability descriptions, you will see the affected CVEs. You will actually see something interesting. The scoring that comes from CVSS3 is a 10. No surprise, right? We'll see attack vectors that are affected by this vulnerability. And here's an interesting point. We know this is in the wild. Our threat intel, there's about 20 threat intel sources that we kind of receive information from, and we have different ways of augmenting that as well, is telling us that this is actually in the wild. And more importantly, I mentioned business groups. Vulcan also has provisions for tags, which means that if you want to tag an asset or set of assets and simply say, hey, these are, for example, external facing, I think it's a great example. This is something that's most likely going to be very badly impacted if this threat was to actually be exercised. Then you can use these tags to essentially improve or increase the way that we calculate risk. Essentially, external facing factors and assets are going to matter a lot more than internal ones. And you can imagine if we had asset impacts that are showing internal facing assets, most likely the calculation of this score wouldn't be necessarily 100. But combination of the tech severity, the actual asset metadata, and the threat intelligence that we've discovered, or that we've actually received information from, makes this a very vulnerable, max high risk of 100, highly critical vulnerability that we want to take an action on. So before we do that, and we take an action, to describe in a little bit more detail of what we provide from the platform perspective, you can see in here different patches that exist currently to obviously take care of this particular remote code execution issue from Log4j, obviously less than 2.15 or 2.15. So there's different fixes available for you to actually partake. And you're going to notice also that in this case, we're affecting 2 assets. So single vulnerability located currently on the 2 machines. So the information is going to be there, and we're going to know that this is really this is a twofold thing. It's not just one off where one machine is affected and it has one vulnerability. There's more at stake. And obviously, in this particular case, it's 2 assets. Most likely in production, you will see a lot more than that, unfortunately. The threat intelligence, also all of the sources that we have where we've encountered this particular CV, and you can see the exact same CVE in this related CV column, you'll see it will come from those particular sources, whether they're Metasploit, GitHub, National Vulnerability Databases, PacketStorm. This is all of the threat intel that tells us this is a valid finding. So now what one can do, we can go ahead and say, we want to take action. So we are going to open potentially a Jira ticket. And in Jira ticket, we're going to provide an asset owner with all the information. We'll attach all the assets associated with this vulnerability. All the remediations that should be applied will also be partaking into some sort of information during the ticket opening itself. And we'll define some basic metadata on the workflow in Jira in this case. of what we want to do. We can also really be aggressive with the SLA and essentially have this due in 2 days or 1 day or however quickly you would like to fix this. But the point is, all of this information is present and all of this information will now go across. Now, what happens then? Many of us have received tickets, have opened tickets, and unless we're going through a ticketing system, searching, watching particular issues or bugs, it's kind of hard to get some notion of the progress of remediation. And I think that's the beauty where Vulcan platform kind of comes in and provides that essentially directly. With a two-way integration to Jira, once you open this particular ticket, you will see that the campaign is also going to be open. So what is a campaign? Campaign essentially provides you with a direct way to perform that particular automation. So if I go back here to my dashboard and I select my tracking, and let's just select one of these in here, remote code execution, you will see the running campaign in here is 319. So my campaign, real quick, don't mind me clicking around really quickly, just to the sake of time, I want to make sure I'm on the right screen. You will know when you open that ticket exactly the campaign that's running and why a campaign. Well, for example, we have one ticket and we have one vulnerability, but we do have those two assets. Both of those assets are still out there. Both of those assets are unpatched. So what happens next? What happens is success rate is 0 because we haven't done anything about it. But as we start getting information fed from scanners that told us that these are active vulnerabilities, and as we see these actual things fixed, we will start closing off these particular vulnerabilities. As we close off the vulnerabilities, as we discover that they're not really there anymore, we can also automatically close off certain tickets for you or provide certain integration to potentially close off certain tickets if that's what you desire. So in other words, you will see the success rate jump to 50% after one system is patched and then to 100 after the other one is. So it's a really nice, quick way to monitor the progress of what you've asked your actual development or IT to do. Now, here's additional things that you can do as well. Not everything needs to be manual. We've done this for the sake of just showing a bit of a workflow of how the information comes in and what you can do about it. But if you really want to automate, and as you should, you don't want to do repetitive mundane tasks over and over again. If you have quick means of doing this, you can set up something called a playbook. So playbook from Vulcan perspective allows you to define criteria of when you see a vulnerability come from with certain criteria, with a different kind of an asset, what do you do about it? So we'll quickly take a look in a pre-canned Log4j remediation that I think will show off some of the interesting things in this particular quick demonstration. So you will see here that the Log4j descriptor, this particular playbook, one instance of it, is going to collect anything that comes from Tenable, where we know it's a Log4j kind of a vulnerability we're looking for. Risk is obviously going to be critical. So this is a bit redundant, maybe not, but let's say it is. And we can add additional things, such as we would like to see different type of hosts coming in. So we are not looking at code projects. We're not looking at containers. We're looking purely at the infrastructure, at hosts. And we can automatically run this, or we can turn this off and just run it upon the next refresh time. But what do? Well, we open a ticket. We aggregate how we want to open a ticket, either into a single one, into multiple ones based on vulnerabilities and assets. We'll attach any relevant remediation scripts. You haven't seen this shown in an example I have yet, but typically from Vulcan, we have capability of attaching vulnerability remediation scripts and providing these scripts in tickets directly. And actually, we can push some of these scripts directly in the infrastructure into GUI to show you and to let you perform that remediation when you're good and ready, when sufficient tests have been performed. So that can be defined in the exact same fashion, same thing we've already shown. And really at the end, once we open the ticket, we can also say, we'll post this to Slack channel, we'll ring the bells, we'll let folks know that, hey, this is happening, there's things coming up from this automation, maybe some things to look at. And of course, you can do different additional kind of integrations, whether you're using Teams instead of Slack, whether you're using Chef instead of Ansible, whether you want to open tickets through Snow instead of Jira, it really doesn't matter. The last bit, of course, is if there is an SLA breach, you can notify appropriate folks that this has happened, and they can take a course of action needs to be taken to quickly react to it. The final piece, I think, of the puzzle, and I know we only have a few minutes left in here, I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions too, is what do we do now that we have all of this information when it comes to reporting, when it comes to trending? You don't really need you can look into what's currently in the dashboard. So just to delineate and show this right now. As you get information freshly scanned and imported, this is your current state of affairs. This is where you're at right now in this moment. You will see some minimal trending that might show up in some of these graphs, but currently, these are your high-risk vulnerabilities. These are your new vulnerabilities. These are your fresh Log4j or existing Log4j problems. But what happens from trending perspective? So Vulcan will allow you to actually dig in really deep into trending. You can dig into the risk or remediation or SLA tracking. We're adding actual remediation intelligence very quickly. But what you can do here, especially from remediation perspective, you can see how long is it taking you to fix certain things. You can define what is considered appropriate way to fix a critical ticket. You can actually look into and analyze what your mean time to remediation is. So if I look historical insights, and please don't mind the graphs demo instances, you're never going to see things that are sitting in overday 90-day bucket, 3-month bucket if they're critical. But the point is, you will see some of this information. You will see some of the mean time to remediation that kind of affects all of this. And you'll be able to really directly relate to these particular graphs. You'll see also what's coming in and what is coming out. In short, your actual graphs, your risk, your remediation, all of this is going to be presented and will show that trending. So can you dig down, slice and dice the data? Absolutely. Do you want to concentrate on the business groups, which are maybe suffering a little bit more when it comes to risk posture, maybe due to some lack of resources, maybe lack of education and remediation aspect of some vulnerabilities? Irrelevant to what the story is, you can dig in and look into your pain points versus some of the success stories as well. And of course, anything and everything that I'm showing in here can absolutely be exported. If you decide to export data in a textual format and simply get a CSV file that you import later into whatever you're importing it into, great. If you actually are want to get an image, perfect. Exporting to an actual physical official report, just as well. I think we only have a few minutes left, and I apologize. We've kind of covered a lot of ground, and I just wanted, very excited about showing you what Vulcan can do from Log4j perspective. I will pause here right now, and I will take any additional questions that you might have. And please feel free to ping us directly. I believe our contact information and everything will be available to you. So I'm very happy to take offline discussions or emails or anything like that. But thank you very much for your time.
And definitely. And Igor, you and Mike are going to be over in the Slack channel as well,
yes.
right? To handle
Yeah, we already have access. Yep.
Yeah. So first off, fantastic presentation. I don't see any open questions here, but if you've got one, drop one in here quick. Cool. But in the meantime, I'll say this is exactly. I got a couple of things. I live tweeted several pieces of this because a couple of things like really hit me here. One was tracking that campaign. Definitely, I'm a big Jira fan, so the Jira integration was great. But even before that, and I think, Mike, you were presenting at the time, you highlighted really the vulnerability management slide. And it was like here's what vulnerability management is doing, and here's all the other stuff that we probably should be doing, right? I don't think that that's lost on anybody that does vulnerability management. What I constantly hear is, I don't know how to do it with the resources I have available. And it looks like this is a fantastic resource, right? To mature that vulnerability management side. Guys, fantastic presentation. So many great highlights. Any closing thoughts here as we wrap up?
Nothing here in the moment. Igor and I are both in both the Vulcan Slack channel on the SANS, and we're in the discussion channels as well. So if you want to bring anything up, you can reach out to us there. I believe our emails are both available. So if you want to reach out, more than happy to take the questions. And as my standard has been, if I don't know the answer immediately, I will find an answer for you and I will get it to you.
There you go. And folks, these are two gentlemen who have obviously a lot of experience in vulnerability management, but also are dealing with a cross section of, by nature, what Vulcan Cyber does, are dealing with a cross section of other organizations who have, no shock, vulnerability management challenges, right? So they are seeing, whereas you get to see an organization or two or three or four as you move across, your career. They are seeing a ridiculous cross section of organizations and their vulnerability management challenges. These gentlemen are a wealth of expertise and knowledge, right? I guess with that, Gentlemen, thank you so much for bringing the content to the SANS community.